Good morning. Welcome to 18 May 2019. And I'm Christopher from forklifttheology.com. The Bible in blue jeans and work boots. Now, disappointment comes in life. We know this. We experience disappointment, setbacks, things like that all the time. It's just the way life is. It can't be helped. For instance, myself. Now, I lift flatbed trailers for a living. Yes, I am a bona fide forklift operator. That's what I do. That said, I had my disappointments yesterday at work. Nothing too critical, it's just when the workday began, I was expecting we'd only get 4 flatbeds out, which, considering some other issues going on at the time, well, it would be nice if we kept it at that number. Then it started looking like 5, and we're just like, this could get tight. But oh no, we ended up sending 7 flatbed trailers out. We were running low on gear, and it was a scrounge to finish. But we did it. And we did it right. But there's a bit of disappointment because what we were expecting and what ended up happening were just 2 different things. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. But I'm going one step further, too. Pardon, new hat. Now, those who follow me, you're not surprised when I talk about the rapture, because I think it's bogus. But let's go one step further. I think that sets a lot of people up for disappointment. The fact is, there were 2 rapture prophecies, one for the 14th and one for the 16th of May. They both failed, and failed spectacularly, as I anticipated. And it's not a good thing. A lot of people have been disappointed by this. I've seen a few YouTube channels in which the people who run those channels talk about that disappointment. Kudos to you guys for doing that. I appreciate it. It concerns me when people get set up for something and it just doesn't fall through. And the rapture is one of those things. And here's how I see this. First of all, every time you make a prophecy about when the rapture is going to come, you're violating the first commandment. You know, I am the Lord thy God who brought thee up out of Egypt. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. This is a very important commandment to think about. You are not God. I am not God. God alone is God. So what does that have to do with the rapture? Well, quite simple. When you predict something like that, you are telling God what God is going to do. You're putting yourself in God's seat. You don't belong in God's seat. I don't belong in God's seat. Only God belongs in God's seat, because God alone is God. You and I, we are frail, fallible, mortal flesh. We are weak and foolish. Now then, to discuss the disappointment factor here. A lot of people, when the rapture didn't happen on the 14th, they were disappointed. I get it. When the 16th came, again, they were disappointed. And I get it. As I've said previously, I used to believe in the rapture, and when it didn't happen when it was supposed to, I was disappointed. I nearly lost faith. There were all these different authors and writers, many of them very famous at the time, Christian apologeticists and pastors. And they blew it. The rapture didn't come, and unfortunately, I almost lost faith. It was after that I learned of the Augsburg Confession, and the 17th article of the Augsburg Confession in particular, which, for all practical purpose, refutes the rapture. Likewise, so did the book in one of my previous videos, Jesus Against the Rapture. Now there's another book, Things to Come Next for Planet Earth, by Aaron Luther Plusher. It also refutes the rapture, as it was presented by Hal Lindsey in his book, Late Great Planet Earth. Now, let's slow down a bit, shall we? Why are we so desperate for the Lord's return? Why? It's not going to be all sunshine and roses on that day. The Bible describes it very plainly as being a great and dreadful day, and dreadful indeed. Think about this. Not one of us is going to be able to stand on that day, because every single one of us is frail, mortal flesh. Each and every one of us is a sinner. There isn't an exception here. You, me, pick your greatest hero. Every single living human being, every single human being that has ever lived and will ever live, is a failed and flawed individual. We all have our failures, our shortcomings, our flaws, bad temper, anger issues, questionable morals. When we start calling evil good, we are putting ourselves again in the place of God. Unfortunately, that's becoming all too common. And that evil being called good is why so many are trying to hasten the day of the Lord. Nope, you can't do it. God has a timeline for when He plans to return to this earth to judge us once and for all. There's nothing you and I can do about that. Israel's rebirth as a nation in 1948. That might have been divine providence. But that's not necessarily a sign of anything. The nation of Israel has undergone rebirths many times over. They're recounted very plainly in the Bible. This could just be one of those. We don't know. And that's the honest truth. Israel is a significant nation. Far more significant than most of the nations in the Middle East. But they are still just one nation. The United States is one nation. Norway, one nation. Russia is one nation too. But none of us are so significant in the grand scheme of things to think that we can last forever. Nations come and go. I've seen it in my own lifetime. I'm sure many of you have too. Now there are two more prophecy dates coming up. One of them's a bit vague, I'll say that. The first one is for the 21st of May, which is in about 3 days. I don't anticipate anything. It's going to be another work day for me, because it's a Tuesday. Please, don't get your hopes hung up on that date. Nothing's happening. If the Lord Himself returns on that day, that's His decision. You and I have no part in that. He's going to come when He's going to come. We can be sure of that much. The other date is the vague one. Is any time from the 14th, which was just a few days ago, until the 9th of June. This creates an interesting conundrum. It's called the tomorrow syndrome. If it didn't happen today, then it's going to be tomorrow. If it didn't happen today, it's going to be tomorrow. If it didn't happen today, it's going to be tomorrow. And this will continue on up until the 10th of June, when that prophecy too will fail. What's funny is that last one, unlike the other two, the two that just failed, its proponent, who has failed to predict the rapture before, his last prediction date being 30th of April this year, he still has all his videos up. This makes life easy. It only makes life easy for one reason. It's going to be easy for every one of us to turn back to him after it fails and say, hey, you are violating God's commandments. You're putting yourself in God's shoes and trying to tell God what God will do. And you are doing horribly at it. You are a false prophet. And any and everyone who tries to predict the date of the rapture, whether it's a specific day or a time frame in which it could happen, you are a false prophet. Stop trying to be God. You are not. I'd like to put the best possible instruction on stuff like this, but honestly, I can't. And I can't for one reason. I'm not God. You are not God. God is God. And God's standard is far greater than what any one of us can possibly hope to be. Now, to be fair, Christ Jesus died upon the cross for our sins. He was buried in the tomb, and on the third day he rose again, that we might have life eternal. And that's because God knew we couldn't measure up to his standard. He knew. So he provided a way. Please, no more rapture prophecies. No more trying to tell God what God's going to do. We should expect the coming of the Lord, absolutely. But, please, think of it this way. When he comes, is he going to find us doing what we're supposed to be doing? Or is he going to find us sitting on our rear ends, being so heavenly minded that we are no earthly good, and have such weak faith that we might not have any faith at all? I don't want to be a killjoy, but I want to be honest. You're far better going to work, going to school, working on your budgets, doing your homework, continuing with life as it should be until the Lord's coming. The master of the house wants to find all things in order when he returns from his trip, does he not? And if the servants are slack in their dealings, if they're not found by the master doing the things that he would have them do, those servants are faithless. They should be watchful and mindful of their master while he is gone. But they shouldn't be sitting on their laurels just waiting under the auspices of, you are not here, so we do not know what to do. No, our master has made it clear what we're to do. Serve one another in love, patience, and generosity, giving each as we can, lifting one another up. And when we make false predictions, we're not lifting each other up. We're hurting one another. I do not delight in these things. I don't delight in these false rapture prophecies necessarily. I find it comical when they fail to some degree, but by the same token, it grieves me because I myself lost faith because of it once. So tell me. Tell me, you who predict the rapture. Tell me, you who set dates on the Lord's coming. How do you justify yourselves? How do you live with yourself when your prophecy fails? Because you have deceived many. Deception is not part of the Christian faith. Never has been. Never can be. I've been as honest as I possibly can with my videos. I've been as honest as I possibly can be in the blog site. I do research. I think. I read my Bible. I question myself and my own faith. That last part is called self-examination. Introspection. A fancy word for it is genuflect. And I find I don't know everything. I find I'm a flawed creature who has failed to hold God's own standard so many times it's not funny. To the point where someone might argue, how can you argue in favor of God's standard if you yourself can't keep it? Well, the beauty of that is this. I know I can't. But God's standard is still God's standard. It's what we should strive to uphold anyway, even if we can't do it perfectly. The Apostle Paul recognized that the law is good. He said, and I quote, "Apart from the law, I would know not sin, but I know sin." So the law is good. I'm kind of paraphrasing and doing it really, really badly here. But there's a point to it. The Apostle Paul recognized that the law is good. It is God's standard. It's what we should all strive for. Law is also a mirror. It shows you and me just how horrible we are, how fallen we are, how far from God's standard we are. And then it's a curve. And this is the part that I like. It's there to protect us. Even if we don't keep it perfectly. By following God's command as best as we can, it protects us from many evils and much harm. That's what it's supposed to do. That's how God designed it. Those who follow the law, even if they didn't follow it perfectly, and they did so because of their own desire for God's law and their love for God, God called them good and faithful witnesses. When the prophet Elijah thought he was the only one that remained, no, God told him not so. There were still 7,000, and Elijah didn't know it, who had not bended their knee to Baal. And that's what you're doing when you predict the rapture. You're bending your knee to Baal. You may not think so, but you are. Because you're lying. Plain and simple. Your lies about God's return get people all worked up, only to lead to disappointment and dismay, and possibly cause people to lose faith. It shouldn't be that way. Now, I have one last thing I want to say about the rapture. I believe the doctrine is demonic. Yes, demonic. I am repulsed by how this doctrine is treated by many Christians. I've seen it on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and even YouTube. Not to mention I've seen it in many churches. The rapture is, in fact, one of many litmus tests of whether or not you're a Christian by some. If you don't believe it, you're not saved, is what they'll tell you. I myself have heard this said to me. So why? Why would anyone do that? I think it's simple. It's because the rapture, if it were to happen, all those people who got raptured would be considered set apart by God, special, chosen, somehow better than everyone who got left behind. Funny. When Noah built his ark, at the end of everything, Noah and his family were the only ones left behind. The wicked were taken. Interesting, that. Likewise, Moses, when in the parting of the Red Sea, when they passed through, when the waters came back, Pharaoh's army was taken. Moses and the children of Israel were left behind. Now, the go-to verse, of course, for the rapture is the one about 1 Thessalonians 4, where it says, the Lord shall descend and all that. What's interesting is that part about how it says, we who are alive and remain. Now, you need to understand something about all that. The Apostle Paul was not talking necessarily about the coming of the Lord. To be sure, the coming of the Lord is a part of it. But there was something more important. A fairly long period of time had passed since Christ's resurrection and ascension. People were dying. Paul wanted to reassure his readers, very plainly, that just because people were dying didn't mean that Christ's promises weren't going to be fulfilled. I mean, here we are 2,000 years later, and the return of the Lord has not been. That doesn't mean it won't happen. It's just not in God's time for it to happen yet. Paul wanted to assure his readers that we who are left behind, because when someone dies, they go to the presence of God. Whether they did evil, whether they did good, doesn't matter. They will stand in God's presence, and they'll stand before God as their judge. You and I have this same fate. It will happen. God is God. He is the good and righteous judge. He will judge all of us. But Paul wanted to assure his readers that just because those who've believed before have died, that doesn't mean that it's in vain. It doesn't mean that Christ won't come. Indeed, when Christ comes, the dead shall rise first, and then we who are alive and remain. We who are left behind shall be brought to the presence of the Lord. That's what's there. There's nothing in there about we're going to be taken away for 7 years. And that's demonic to say that. Demonic because there's nothing in the Bible that says that. Demonic because what God would be so callous, so cruel, as to make the planet suffer for 7 years, to make the people who still are on the face of the earth suffer for 7 years, and then to turn around and those self-same people who suffer for 7 years suffer in eternity in hell. No. There's nothing in the Bible that says that's God's plan. Yes, eternity in hell is a real thing, and it will happen for a good many people. That's unfortunate. But God is not going to be so capricious as to make people suffer 7 years of wrath here on earth, and then an eternity in torment. No. The Bible doesn't say that anywhere. I've never seen it. So tell me, do we continue with making predictions about something that won't happen? Do we continue with trying to tell people something that isn't true? Christ Jesus himself actually said something about all this. He said that when they say to you, he's here or he's here, don't believe it. So too, when someone says he's coming on such and such a date, don't believe it. It is not for us to know the coming of the Lord's day. He will come when he comes. The Bible promises that when he comes, it will be with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and the trumpet of God. And it will be at the last trumpet. How many trumpets are after the last trumpet? 0. Let me say that again. 0. There's nothing you and I can do about that. You can't predict when the last trumpet's going to sound. But when the last trumpet sounds, that's it. Christ is coming, once for all. And that's the way it should be. Please. Don't fall for false prophecies. Don't fall for the smooth words for itchy ears. The Bible is a bit harsh at times. I don't deny it. But in its harshness, we see God's love for us. God's standard is there throughout the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. And God's plan for us starts in the Garden of Eden, with the promise made to Eve. It continues all the way to that final day when Christ shall descend with the voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God, and at that time redeem the earth once for all. And every eye will see him on that day. That is awesome. That's what we should be expecting. That's what we should be looking for. And yet, we should be doing that while we do our jobs, our homework, our day-to-day lives. Because the Master is going to want us to be found doing what we're supposed to do. Helping one another, caring for one another. That is what Christ has called us to do. Now, I'm going to leave you with an odd thought. People don't like me when I answer the question, what would Jesus do? There's a reason for that. Flipping tables over and chasing people around with whips is definitely within the realm of possibilities. For indeed, Christ himself flipped over tables and chased people around with a whip. To be certain, he was purging the temple of the money changers and all the merchants, because the temple had become more or less a marketplace. So too, many modern churches have become a marketplace. Espresso stands, bookstores. I have to wonder if Christ would be pleased with this when he returns. And that's the odd thought there. Have our churches just become marketplaces? And the rapture is just something else we sell. We try to get people in the door. Just something to think about. May the Lord be with you, now and forevermore. In Jesus' most holy and precious name. Amen.